On the day I lost my home, the one I'd lived in for 37 years, my own son told me they couldn't afford my lifestyle. My daughter-in-law just smirked. They tricked me, stole everything. I stood there utterly broken, but a silent promise ignited within me. You see, they didn't know what I was truly capable of. This is my story. Like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence of the courtroom. 63 years old, and my life was being dismantled, brick by painful brick, all because of a single trusted signature. The sterile air of the room did little to cool the fire of indignation that burned within me, though on the surface I tried to project a calm dignity. This was a battle for my very existence, and I refused to crumble here. There they were, Bethany and Thomas, my son, sitting in the front row, just feet away. Not a shred of remorse creased their faces, only a smug satisfaction that twisted my stomach. Bethany, my daughter-in-law, was perfectly coiffed, her blonde hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. Thomas, my own flesh and blood, avoided my gaze, yet radiated an air of self-satisfaction that made my blood run cold. It was a tableau of betrayal, painted in the harsh, unforgiving light of a legal proceeding. Just 3 short months ago, my world had felt secure. I was an independent widow, living comfortably in the home Arthur and I had built our lives in, surrounded by memories and the quiet contentment of retirement. Then Bethany had arrived on my doorstep, a picture of distress. Her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were swimming with tears. She painted a dire picture of Thomas's floundering business, a venture he'd poured years into, one that was now threatening to collapse. Their home, the one I'd often visited for Sunday dinners with my grandchildren, was at risk of foreclosure. She spoke of desperate measures, of sleepless nights, of losing everything. And then she proposed a solution, a temporary fix. Ellie, she'd pleaded, her voice thick with what I now knew was false emotion. We need your help, just for a little while. She suggested using my house as collateral for a temporary business loan, emphasizing it was just paperwork, a simple arrangement to tide them over until Thomas's business bounced back. She'd assured me with earnest eyes and trembling hands that it was nothing permanent, just a formality to secure the financing they needed. My heart ached, not just for Thomas and the financial ruin he faced, but for my grandchildren, whose stable lives she claimed were hanging by a thread. I loved them fiercely. My son Thomas called me later, his voice laced with an unfamiliar desperation. "Mom, please. You're our only hope," he'd said, his words tearing at my maternal instincts. How could I refuse my own son, my grandchildren, when I had the means to help? My decision, fueled by love and a lifetime of trust, was sealed. I remember the day clearly. The lawyer's office was unfamiliar, the air thick with the scent of old paper. The stack of documents seemed daunting, but Bethany was there, smiling reassuringly, pointing exactly where I needed to sign. My hand trembled as I put pen to paper, not just signing a document, but unknowingly signing away a part of my soul. This house, the one Arthur and I had bought as newlyweds 37 years ago, was more than just bricks and mortar. It was our sanctuary, the place where we'd raised Thomas, where we'd celebrated triumphs and mourned losses. Every corner held a memory, every creak in the floorboards whispered a story. I believed I was helping my family, lending a hand to ensure their future. Only 3 weeks passed before Bethany reappeared. But this time the tears were gone. Her face was a mask of cold professionalism, her voice devoid of the warmth she'd once used to manipulate me. She dropped the bombshell with chilling precision. I hadn't just collateralized the house, I had transferred ownership. My signature, that act of love and trust, had unwittingly given them everything. "We're selling the house, Ellie," she stated, her words like a physical blow. "It's an asset now, vital for Thomas's business to survive and thrive." The words echoed in my ears, a cruel joke played by someone I had loved. Selling my house? Where would I go? This was my home, my life. Bethany simply shrugged, a dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. "You'll figure something out," she said, as if discussing a minor inconvenience, not the utter demolition of my life. I called Thomas, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. I expected no, demanded an explanation, an apology. His response was a dagger to my heart, delivered with a casual cruelty that still haunts me. If that's what the papers say, that's what they say, Mom. We can't afford to keep supporting your lifestyle. My lifestyle? The modest, solitary existence I'd built after Arthur's passing? The audacity of it stole my breath. Within days, a stark for sale sign stood proudly in my front yard, mocking the precious memories within. A realtor, efficient and impersonal, informed me I had exactly 2 weeks to vacate, 2 weeks to pack up 37 years of life, to find a new home, to somehow piece together a future that had been stolen from me. 2 weeks later, my life was condensed into a few cardboard boxes, my treasured belongings relegated to a tiny rented storage unit. I found myself in a tiny rundown studio apartment, a far cry from the spacious home I'd shared with Arthur. It was cramped, smelled faintly of mildew, and offered little comfort. My social security check, once comfortably sufficient, now barely stretched to cover the exorbitant rent and basic necessities. I was drowning, financially and emotionally. I crunched the numbers late into the night, staring at them until my eyes ached. My modest retirement savings? 6 months, tops, before I would be completely destitute. Despair was a cold, constant companion, whispering doubts and fears into my ear. One sleepless night, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, an UberX advertisement popped up, a bright, colorful beacon in the darkness of my hopelessness. Drive when you want, earn what you need. I'd never been a professional driver, not really, beyond trips to the grocery store or visiting my grandchildren. The thought of navigating city streets with strangers in my backseat filled me with a quiet dread. But what choice did I have? Desperation sharpened my resolve. I needed to survive. The first few weeks were a blur of wrong turns, impatient passengers, and fumbling with the app. I was constantly lost, my navigation system often sending me down one-way streets or into endless construction zones. My pride took a beating with every critical review, every sigh from a passenger. Slowly, awkwardly, I found my rhythm. I learned the shortcuts, memorized the routes, and even began to anticipate the traffic. But the shame gnawed at me, a bitter reminder of my fall from grace. The isolation in my tiny apartment, broken only by the anonymous faces in my back seat, was a heavy burden. And that's how I found myself here in this sterile courtroom, looking at the people who had done this to me, ready to fight for what remained of my dignity. The first week as an Uber driver was, to put it mildly, an unmitigated disaster. Every shift felt like a personal assault on my already fragile confidence. I got lost more times than I could count, even with the GPS chirping directions at me. Streets I'd driven on for decades suddenly seemed unfamiliar, twisting into labyrinths of one-way signs and unexpected detours. My hands often trembled on the steering wheel, my heart pounding whenever I had to merge onto a busy highway. One particularly harried passenger, after a 20-minute drive that should have taken 10, slammed the door and promptly left me a 1-star review, accompanied by a scathing comment about my utter lack of navigational skills. I nearly quit right then and there, tears blurring my vision as I stared at the damning feedback. But the memory of my dwindling savings, the smell of mildew in my studio apartment, and the chilling words, "We can't afford to support your lifestyle," spurred me on. I had no choice but to persevere. By the second week, a reluctant familiarity began to settle in. I started anticipating traffic patterns, learning the quickest routes, and even mastering the quirky nuances of the Uber app. Interacting with passengers, initially a source of anxiety, became a series of brief, almost theatrical exchanges. I learned to smile politely, nod at their stories, and keep my own counsel. It wasn't enjoyable, not by any stretch, but it was survivable. Yet the hardest part of this new solitary existence wasn't the erratic driving hours or the rude passengers. It was the crushing isolation. My phone, once a lifeline to Thomas and my grandchildren, remained stubbornly silent. Thomas, consumed by his thriving business, had stopped calling entirely. Bethany, ever efficient, had blocked my number after I dared to question her about the house. My old friends, the ones I used to meet for coffee or bridge games, became distant memories. The shame of my situation, The humiliation of being tricked out of my home by my own family kept me from reaching out. How could I explain? How could I face their pity, or worse, their judgment? Many nights, after long, exhausting shifts, I would pull my car into a secluded parking spot, turn off the engine, and just cry. Silent, burning tears that streamed down my face, hot trails of grief and regret. I missed Arthur with an ache that felt physical. He was always my anchor, my confidant. Ellie, he used to say, his hand gently squeezing mine. Life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes it throws curveballs you never expect, but there's always a new path, a new horizon. His words, once a comfort, now felt like a cruel irony. My story felt over, complete, a tragedy with no hopeful ending. Little did I know the most important chapters, the ones that would truly surprise me, were yet to begin. It was a crisp Wednesday morning in early October when a new ping came through on my app. The passenger's name was listed simply as J. Sterling, and the pickup location was the Grandview Hotel. My heart gave a little flutter of apprehension. The Grandview was one of the city's most luxurious establishments, a place I'd only ever driven past, never entered. I pulled my modest sedan up to the imposing entrance, feeling acutely aware of the disparity between its grandeur and my own humble vehicle. A moment later, a figure emerged from beneath the ornate canopy. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark, expensive suit, his silver hair neatly combed. His bearing was aristocratic, his posture ramrod straight, but what struck me most was the profound sadness etched upon his face. It was a weariness that went beyond mere fatigue, a deep-seated sorrow that seemed to emanate from him. As he approached my car, I checked the app again, just to be sure. Jay. Sterling? I asked, lowering the passenger window. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. His voice, when he spoke, was low and cultured. Yes, the Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, please. Of course, I replied, a small tremor in my voice. I'm Ellie Vance, please. Make yourself comfortable. He settled into the back seat, the soft leather creaking faintly under his weight. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of his reflection. His blue-gray eyes, though distant, held a depth of feeling that I instinctively recognized. The 45-minute drive was mostly silent, a welcome change from the usual chatter or demanding instructions I often encountered. He didn't ask me to turn up the radio or comment on the traffic. He simply sat there, a silent, dignified presence. A few times I noticed him observing me in the rearview mirror, his gaze thoughtful, almost contemplative. Each time I caught his eye, he quickly looked away, a faint flush rising on his cheeks. It was a curious interaction, a silent dance of observation and averted gazes. When we finally arrived at the airport terminal, he instructed me to pull over. The fare, according to the app, was $28. He pulled out a crisp $50 bill and handed it to me. Keep the change, Ellie, he said, his voice gentle. My eyes widened slightly. A $50 tip for a $28 fare was unheard of. As I was thanking him, he paused, his hand on the door handle. Ellie he said, would you be available for a regular pickup, same time next week? Wednesdays at 9:15 a.m.? I was genuinely surprised. Regular customers were a rare luxury in my line of work. Yes, I managed, a grateful smile spreading across my face. Yes, Mr. Sterling, I'd be happy to. He nodded slowly, his blue-gray eyes meeting mine once more, this time holding my gaze. Thank you, Ellie. You drive very carefully. It's comforting. With that, he exited the car, disappearing into the bustling airport terminal. I watched him go, a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. His profound sadness, a silent echo of my own, resonated deeply. There was a unique connection in that shared melancholy, a quiet understanding that transcended words. I found myself looking forward to these Wednesday drives now, not just for the generous tips, which were a lifeline, but for his respectful, melancholic presence. In a world that had suddenly become harsh and indifferent, Julian Alistair Sterling was a quiet island of unexpected kindness. The following Wednesday, precisely at 9:15 a.m., Julian Alistair Sterling was indeed waiting outside the Grandview Hotel. My heart gave a little flutter of anticipation. He looked much the same as the week before, impeccably dressed, his silver hair catching the morning light. But this time he carried something new, a small, intricately carved wooden box, which he held with almost tender care in his lap once he was settled in the back seat. It wasn't large, perhaps no bigger than a shoebox, and it seemed to absorb his attention completely. I tried to initiate some conversation, sensing a slight tension in the air. "Business trip, Mr. Sterling?" I asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He stirred, his gaze lifting from the box for a moment. "Something like that," he replied vaguely, his voice soft, and I noticed his fingers tightening almost imperceptibly around the smooth wood of the box. I took that as my cue to remain silent. Still, I found myself stealing glances at him. There was a dignified bearing about him, a quiet strength that felt familiar. It reminded me of Arthur in a way, the way he carried himself even when burdened by worry. This pattern continued for several weeks. Every Wednesday morning, without fail, Julian would be waiting. He was always punctual, always dressed in a fine suit, and always carried that small wooden box, cradling it in his lap throughout the ride. He remained largely silent, lost in his own thoughts, gazing out the window or simply staring at the box. He never spoke unless spoken to, yet his presence was never uncomfortable. Instead, it was surprisingly soothing. He never failed to tip generously, always with a polite, "Thank you, Ellie," and a brief, gentle smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. These weekly rides, initially just a source of much-needed income, gradually became a comforting routine in my otherwise tumultuous life. As the weeks turned into a month and then two, I started noticing the small, peculiar details of his ritual. His punctuality was absolute. I never had to wait even a minute for him. He always settled into the back seat directly behind me, a precise spot. And most notably, despite his weekly trips to the airport, he never carried any luggage. No briefcase, no carry-on, just that wooden box. It deepened the mystery surrounding him, but I respected his quiet privacy. He was a constant, a small island of predictability in my unpredictable life. Then, one particularly gloomy, rainy Wednesday, something shifted. The sky was a bruised purple, and the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof of my car amplified the quiet of the interior. As I drove, I happened to glance in the rearview mirror and saw him with his eyes closed, his head resting gently against the headrest. His fingers were tracing the intricate carvings on the wooden box, and his lips were moving almost imperceptibly, as if he were engaged in a silent conversation. A profound wave of empathy washed over me. He looked so utterly vulnerable, so lost in his private world of sorrow. Without really thinking, I asked, my voice softer than I intended, "Are you all right, Mr. Sterling?" He startled, his eyes snapping open. He blinked a few times as if returning from a far-off place, and then straightened his posture. "Yes, I'm fine, Ellie, thank you." His voice was a little rougher than usual, betraying a hint of his inner turmoil. A moment of hesitation, then, surprising even myself, I found the words. "You know," I said gently, meeting his gaze briefly in the mirror, "if you ever want to talk about whatever is bothering you, I'm a good listener." The words hung in the air, a small, unexpected offering of companionship. He didn't reply immediately. The silence stretched, filled only by the whisper of the wipers and the hum of the engine. I thought perhaps I had overstepped, ventured too far into his private grief. But then, just as we pulled up to the airport terminal, he leaned forward slightly. "You have kind eyes, Ellie," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the engine as I shifted into park. "They remind me of someone I knew." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, his voice tinged with a deep, aching regret, "Someone I should have fought harder to keep." Before I could respond, before I could process the depth of sorrow in that single sentence, he quickly exited the car, disappearing into the terminal's bustling entrance. That night, Julian's words echoed in my mind. Someone I should have fought harder to keep. His pain was so palpable, so raw, and it resonated deeply with my own recent losses, my own feelings of helplessness and regret. I had lost my home, my financial security, and in a way, my son, all because I hadn't fought hard enough, hadn't seen the betrayal coming. Julian's quiet sorrow mirrored my own, creating an unexpected, unspoken bond. Curiosity, combined with a strange sense of concern, led me to my laptop. A man of his apparent stature, traveling regularly, always in fine clothes, yet without luggage. He had to be someone significant, I thought. I typed Julian Sterling into the search engine, expecting a deluge of articles, perhaps a Wikipedia page. But to my surprise and growing puzzlement, I found nothing. No prominent businessman, no politician, no public figure. It was as if Julian Alistair Sterling simply didn't exist in the public sphere, or at least not under that name. During our 7th week of these silent, weekly journeys, Julian arrived at the Grandview Hotel without the wooden box. Instead, clutched in his hand was an old, somewhat faded photograph. He settled into the back seat, the absence of the box creating a noticeable void. The usual quiet filled the car, but this time it felt different, charged with a news energy. As we neared the airport, he finally broke the silence, his voice low and hesitant. "Ellie," he began, "may I ask you something personal?" I nodded, my eyes meeting his in the rearview mirror. His blue-gray eyes, though still tinged with sorrow, now held a direct, searching quality. "Have you ever lost someone you loved?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "Because you were too proud or too scared to fight for them?" Julian's question hung in the air, reverberating through the small confines of my car. "Have you ever lost someone you loved because you were too proud or too scared to fight for them?" His words struck a raw nerve, slicing through the carefully constructed walls I had built around my grief and regret. My mind raced, flashing through images. Arthur, my beloved husband, whom I'd sometimes been too proud to admit my anxieties to. Thomas, my son, for whom my fear of losing him had made me blind to Bethany's deceit. And even myself, the vibrant woman I once was, lost in the shadows of betrayal. "Yes," I confessed, the word a simple, quiet admission, yet heavy with the weight of my past. "Yes, I have." He nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on me in the rearview mirror, a deep understanding in his blue-gray eyes. "So have I," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "And I've spent 45 years wondering what my life might have been like if I'd been braver." 45 years. The number hung in the air, a testament to a lifetime of unspoken longing and unresolved pain. It resonated deeply within me, stirring a profound curiosity about his past. What tragedy had scarred him so deeply? Why was he, a man of such evident stature, sharing such intimate details with me? A stranger, his Uber driver. I longed to ask, but a sense of decorum, and perhaps a touch of my own fear, held my tongue. Weeks passed, each Wednesday deepening the quiet connection we shared. Then came the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, a still gray morning that promised snow later in the day. I arrived at the Grandview Hotel a few minutes early, and to my surprise, Julian was already waiting. He wasn't standing tall and straight as usual. His posture was diminished, almost slumped, his movements slower, more deliberate. I noticed a tremor in his hands as he opened the car door. A wave of unease washed over me. "Good morning, Ellie," he said as he settled into the back seat, his voice softer, almost fragile. The old photograph he had carried last week was clutched tightly in his hand again. He seemed smaller, more vulnerable. "I've been better," he admitted, a faint, melancholic smile touching his lips. Then he added, his voice gaining a strange, profound resonance. "But I'm glad it's today. Glad that if this is my last Wednesday, it's with you." A chill, cold and sharp, ran down my spine, despite the warmth of the car heater. "What do you mean your last Wednesday?" I asked, my voice tight with a sudden, unexpected concern. The thought of losing this quiet, sorrowful companion, this unexpected anchor in my life, brought a pang of genuine distress. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he leaned forward, his storm-cloud eyes, though still heavy with sorrow, seemed to brighten, to hold a new, urgent light. "Ellie, may I tell you about someone I loved once?" I nodded, my breath caught in my throat. I sensed the gravity of the moment, the raw vulnerability in his tone. This wasn't just a story, it was a confession, a final release. "Her name was Eleanor Rose," he began, his voice a low, steady current of remembrance. My heart stopped. "Eleanor, my first name, Rose, my middle name and my maiden name." The very air seemed to thicken around me. It couldn't be a coincidence. My hands, already trembling slightly, gripped the steering wheel tighter. "She was 17 when I met her," he continued, oblivious to the silent turmoil he had unleashed within me. And I was 18. It was the summer of 1978. 17 in 1978. That was me. That was exactly me. My mouth went dry, a sudden phantom taste of dust on my tongue. The past, which I thought I had buried deep beneath layers of memory and pain, was suddenly rising, shimmering before me. He went on, his voice painting a vivid picture. She worked at her father's diner. Small place just outside of town. Best burgers you ever tasted. He chuckled softly, a sound laced with both fondness and pain. She had the most beautiful dark hair, always pulling it back with a ribbon when she was working. And her eyes, he sighed, a long, drawn-out breath. Her eyes were like autumn leaves shifting from hazel to amber in the sunlight. He paused, a flicker of a smile on his lips, then with a soft laugh added, and she had this tiny, almost invisible scar on her left hand, right on her palm. Said she got it when she was 12, trying to help her dad lift a hot skillet. My left hand, as if possessing a will of its own, instinctively went to the scar on my palm. It was there, just as he described, a thin white line almost imperceptible to anyone else. A scar from when I was 12, helping my father at the diner, a hot skillet slipping from my grasp. The pieces of the puzzle, disjointed and scattered for decades, were suddenly clicking into place with a horrifying, exhilarating precision. We fell in love that summer, Julian continued, his voice thick with emotion, the present fading into the past. Real love, the kind you read about in books. We had so many plans. She wanted to be a teacher, make a difference in young lives. I was going to have to study business, build something great for us. He looked at the old photograph in his hand, then back up at my reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes, still filled with sorrow, now held a spark of recognition. My heart was pounding, the revelations about Julian's past and my own intertwined history threatening to overwhelm me. This story is far from over, and I promise you it only gets more incredible from here. If you're finding yourself as captivated as I was, please hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss a single part of what happens next. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a tsunami of memories and emotions crashing down. My hands, already trembling, threatened to lose their grip on the steering wheel. The airport, our usual destination, seemed to recede into an impossibly distant future. My vision blurred, tears stinging my eyes. I didn't know how I was doing it, but I managed to pull the car off the road, swerving into the nearest gas station parking lot, the crunch of gravel under the tires jarring me further. I cut the engine, plunging the car into an abrupt, disquieting silence, broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart. My whole body shook. "Sir," I whispered, my voice barely a thread. What was her last name?" I already knew deep in my bones, but I needed to hear it, to make it undeniably real. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his eyes fixed on the old photograph in his hand, as if summoning courage from the image. "Rose," he said, his voice imbued with a reverence that took my breath away. "Eleanor Rose, the most beautiful name I'd ever heard." With immense effort, I turned in my seat, my gaze locking with his. The old photograph, clutched in his hand, was of me, a younger me, radiant and carefree, standing in front of my father's diner. It was the same photo I had given him that summer. In that instant, as our eyes met across the divide of decades, the recognition dawned on his face at the very same moment it had slammed into me. The storm cloud eyes that had haunted me for weeks suddenly cleared, widening with a mixture of disbelief, shock, and a profound, aching sorrow. "Julian," I breathed. The name, the one I had known him by as my passenger, escaping my lips like a ghost. He closed his eyes, and the dam broke. Tears, heavy and silent, streamed down his silver-haired cheeks, tracing paths through the lines etched by time and sorrow. "Hello, Eleanor Rose," he whispered, his voice cracking, a raw, emotional sound that ripped through me. It was him, Julian Alistair Sterling, the boy who had worked construction that magical summer when I was 17. The boy with the kindest eyes and the most genuine smile, who had promised to return after college, only to vanish, leaving a gaping, aching hole in my teenage heart. I had waited, hoped, dreamed for what felt like an eternity, but he never came. The heartbreak had been immense, a wound that only Arthur, my late husband, had eventually managed to heal. "You said your name was Julian?" I managed, the words catching in my throat, my mind still reeling. He opened his eyes, now glistening with unshed tears, and looked directly at me. "Julian is my middle name," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "I started using it after everything fell apart with my family. Julian was the boy who loved you. Alistair is the man who lost you." Decades of suppressed hurt, confusion, and unanswered questions suddenly burst forth. The carefully constructed walls of my composure crumbled. "Why didn't you come back?" I cried, the anguish raw and uncontrollable. "You promised you'd come back. You promised." His face crumpled, mirroring my pain. He reached a trembling hand towards me, then hesitated, letting it fall back to his lap. "I tried, Eleanor," he said, his voice broken. "My father, he found out about you. He was a very powerful, very proud man. He said a Rose girl wasn't good enough for a Sterling. He said you didn't come from the right family, didn't have the right connections." His words stung, igniting a familiar anger within me. "He threatened to disown me," Julian continued, his gaze distant, lost in the past. "Threatened to cut off all my college funding, everything, if I ever saw you again, if I ever contacted you." My initial anger flared, then slowly gave way to a dawning comprehension, though not necessarily forgiveness. "So you just let him?" I asked, a bitter edge to my voice. "No," he exclaimed, his eyes locking onto mine, earnest and pleading. "No, Eleanor, I didn't. I worked tirelessly. I put myself through college, started my own business from nothing. For 3 years, every waking moment was dedicated to building an empire, to becoming successful enough, powerful enough to defy him, to prove him wrong so I could come back for you and he wouldn't be able to stop me." "3 years?" I asked, the words sharp, laced with a fresh wave of fury. "3 years, Julian. Do you know what 3 years means to a girl of 17? I waited for 3 years. I turned down dates. I turned down proposals, clinging to the hope of your return while you were off building your empire. The unfairness of it, the colossal waste of my young love, overwhelmed me." He flinched, absorbing my anger without complaint. I know," he murmured, his head bowed slightly. "It was a foolish, arrogant plan, but I believed I was doing it for us. I came back, Eleanor. In the spring of 1981, I came back. I had saved enough, built enough. I had a ring in my pocket, ready to propose, ready to tell you that nothing else mattered." He lifted his head, his eyes haunted. "I drove past the diner. I saw you through the window. You were laughing, radiant, showing off your engagement ring to Arthur." He gestured vaguely with the photograph in his hand. "You looked so happy. I believed I was too late. I was too late, and you had moved on. You could have talked to me." The words tore from my throat, raw and choked with the grief of 45 lost years. "You could have knocked on the diner door, Julian. Asked me what happened, why I had a ring on my finger." He shook his head slowly, his eyes still brimming with tears, fixed on the faded photograph. "I loved you too much to ruin your happiness, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice thick with an ancient pain. "You looked so radiant, so completely content. I saw the ring, saw the way you smiled at him. I believed you had found someone who was there for you when you needed him, someone who hadn't disappeared, hadn't made you wait through years of uncertainty and broken promises like I had." His words hit me, each one a sharp barb. He truly believed he was protecting me, even as he was shattering a future we might have had. We sat there, suspended in time, the gas station parking lot a silent witness to our shared sorrow. Both of us were crying, the tears blurring the lines between past and present, washing away decades of unacknowledged pain. We were processing 45 years of missed chances, parallel lives that had run so close, yet never touched. The silence was heavy, filled with the ghosts of what-ifs. Then Julian spoke again, his voice barely audible. "I watched you get married, Eleanor. I stood in the back of the church, hidden in the shadows, just to see you one last time in your wedding dress. You were beautiful. Then I left town. I never came back until recently. I was speechless, utterly dumbfounded. He had been there at my wedding to Arthur? The revelation layered another unimaginable layer onto the already complex tapestry of our rediscovery. A lifetime of what-ifs spun wildly in my mind, a dizzying carousel of alternate realities. What if he had spoken to me that day at the diner? What if he had come to the church? How different would my life have been? I never married, Julian stated, his gaze meeting mine, unwavering. I built an empire, traveled the world, amassed more wealth than I could ever spend. But I never found anyone who made me feel the way you did that summer, Eleanor. No one who ignited that spark, that joy, that sense of absolute belonging. A pang of profound sadness pierced me, not for myself, but for him. He had chosen a life of solitary achievement, haunted by a ghost. My marriage to Arthur was good, Julian, I told him, my voice gentle. We were happy. He was a good man, a wonderful husband. A faint, genuine smile touched his lips, reaching his eyes this time. I know, he said, and there was no hint of resentment, only a deep, quiet sincerity. I'm genuinely glad for you, Eleanor. You deserved all the happiness in the world. My mind, still reeling, turned to practicalities. How did you find me, Julian, I asked, looking around the mundane parking lot, so incongruous with the epic drama unfolding within my car. How did you know to request me as your driver? He pulled out his phone, a sleek, modern device that looked out of place in his trembling hand. I've been keeping track of you, Ellie, he admitted, his voice softening. Not in a creepy way, I promise, just making sure you were okay, from a distance. He offered a small, self-deprecating smile. After I got sick, when I saw Arthur's obituary in the local paper, it suddenly felt urgent. I hired a private investigator specifically to find you, to confirm you were all right. When he told me you were driving for Uber, it took a bit of convincing, but I figured out how to make sure I got your car. I just wanted to see you once, Eleanor. Just once, but once wasn't enough. You got sick? I asked, the words catching in my throat as I finally registered the full import of his earlier statement about his last Wednesday. His expression, though calm, was etched with a profound seriousness that sent a fresh wave of dread through me. He nodded slowly, a deep sigh escaping him. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, he confirmed, his voice steady despite the heartbreaking words. A few weeks, maybe a month if I'm lucky. The doctors have done all they can. Devastation washed over me, cold and relentless. To find him again, only to learn he was leaving so soon? It was a cruel twist of fate, a cosmic joke. My eyes welled up again, but he reached out, his hand gently covering mine. A touch that sent a jolt of long-forgotten warmth through me. Don't cry for me, Eleanor, he said softly, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. I've made my peace. I've lived a full life, albeit a lonely one in many respects. But I couldn't leave without telling you. Without telling you that loving you, even if only for that one summer, was the best thing I ever did. He withdrew his hand, and from the inside pocket of his expensive suit jacket, he pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope. He pressed it into my hand, his gaze intensely serious. This is for you, Ellie. Please, just take it. Don't open it until I'm gone. You'll understand when you do. He looked at me, his eyes now shining with unshed tears, but also with a profound peace. You reminded me what it felt like to be alive again, Eleanor Rose. Even these few Wednesdays with you, a silent presence, have been more meaningful than all the years I spent building my empire. He took a deep breath, and a single tear escaped, tracing a path down his cheek. This is goodbye, my love, but it's not an ending. It's just a pause until we meet again. With those words, he opened the car door, stepped out, and with a final, lingering look, walked away towards the terminal, leaving me alone with an envelope, a lifetime of memories, and a heart both broken and unexpectedly full. I watched Julian Alastair Sterling walk away, his silver hair catching the dull light of the terminal, until he was just another silhouette swallowed by the bustling airport crowd. I stood there clutching the thick envelope he had given me, the weight of it both tangible and symbolic. The car, still parked askew in the gas station lot, felt impossibly empty. My heart was a bruised thing, aching with a grief for a future that had never been, and a love rediscovered only to be lost again. That night, back in the quiet desolation of my studio apartment, I finally opened the envelope. My hands were still trembling. Inside, nestled beneath a folded piece of paper, was a check. My eyes widened, then narrowed, trying to make sense of the figure. $10,000. A truly staggering sum for me, a lifeline. Beneath the check was a note written in Julian's elegant, familiar handwriting. "My dearest Eleanor Rose," it began, "for the woman who taught me what love really means. Use this to take care of yourself the way I should have taken care of you all those years ago. Please accept it without question. It's a small attempt to write a lifetime of regret. Forever yours, Julian." My vision blurred again, hot tears stinging my eyes as I read his words. He was still trying to care for me, even at the very end. As I carefully folded the note, something small and hard clinked at the bottom of the envelope. I reached in and pulled out a small, dark velvet box. My breath hitched. Inside, on a bed of faded white satin, lay a simple, elegant engagement ring. A single, brilliant diamond gleaming softly in the dim light of my apartment. Another note, tucked beneath the ring, explained, "I bought this in 1981, Eleanor. I intended to propose that day. I've carried it with me ever since, a silent reminder of what I lost and what I always hoped to regain. Please wear it or don't, but know it was always meant for you." I cried for hours that night, the tears flowing freely, endlessly. Not just for Julian, for the man who was now facing his end, but for the lost years, the missed chances, the parallel lives that had run so close, yet remained tragically separate. The ring felt impossibly heavy in my palm, a tangible symbol of a love that defied time, a future that had been stolen by pride and circumstance. I had no idea then, as I held that ring and wept, that this emotional, heartbreaking rediscovery was just the beginning of Julian's final, most unexpected act of love. 1 week later, the precise Wednesday morning when Julian usually would have been waiting for me at the Grandview Hotel, my phone rang. I braced myself, a familiar wave of sorrow washing over me. It was a crisp, professional voice on the other end, introducing himself as Mr. Silas Thorne, an attorney. "Regarding the estate of Julian Alistair Sterling," he stated. My heart stopped. The phone felt suddenly heavy in my hand, my fingers growing numb. He's passed away?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. The finality of it, the absolute certainty, was a fresh blow. "Yes, Miss Vance," Mr. Thorne confirmed, his voice devoid of emotion, yet respectful. "Mr. Sterling passed away peacefully 3 days ago. He left very specific instructions in his will, and you are mentioned prominently. We require your presence at our offices as soon as possible." The phone slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the worn linoleum of my studio apartment. Julian was truly gone. The man who had walked back into my life for a few fleeting weeks, who had reopened old wounds and filled them with a beautiful, tragic love, was now irrevocably gone. I picked up the phone, my mind reeling. I was confused, bewildered. Why would Julian leave me anything? How could I possibly explain the complex, heart-wrenching history we shared to a stranger like Mr. Thorne? The next morning, I found myself in an opulent law office, far grander than anything I had ever entered. Mr. Silas Thorne, a man with shrewd eyes and an air of quiet authority, sat across from me. He had been Julian's attorney for 20 years, he explained, and he seemed genuinely perplexed by Julian's final arrangements. "Ms. Vance," he began, his fingers steepled. "Mr. Sterling changed his will approximately 6 weeks ago. Prior to that, his estate was earmarked for various charities and a few distant relatives." He paused, his gaze assessing. "He explicitly made you his primary beneficiary. Despite my advice for more consideration, he was adamant." I felt dizzy. Primary beneficiary? Me? It had to be a mistake, a cruel joke. I don't understand," I stammered, my voice barely audible. What does that mean?" Mr. Thorne leaned forward slightly, his expression softening, perhaps sensing my profound bewilderment. "Ms. Vance, the total value of Mr. Sterling's estate, after all debts and taxes, is approximately $260 million. $260 million. The number swam before my eyes. My head spun, the room tilting precariously. I was convinced it was a mistake, a fantastical sum, utterly beyond the realm of my reality. No, I whispered, shaking my head. That's impossible. There must be a mistake. There is no mistake, Vance, Mr. Thorne said gently, sliding a single folded sheet of paper across the polished mahogany desk towards me. Mr. Sterling anticipated this reaction. He left a handwritten letter for you to be read at this meeting. My trembling fingers reached for the letter, recognizing Julian's elegant script immediately. My dearest Eleanor Rose, it began, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you in body, but please know my love remains. This immense wealth, which I spent my life accumulating, was always an empty trophy without you. This is simply me making sure that the woman I've loved for 45 years is taken care of, secure and comfortable, in a way I failed to do when we were young. He urged me not to feel guilty, explaining that this wealth was always meant for her security and comfort, stating with absolute conviction that she was the only one he ever wanted to give it to. The letter ended with a declaration of his undying love. Tucked beneath the letter was a typed document, meticulously drafted, an ironclad declaration of his love for Eleanor Rose Vance, stating in no uncertain terms that he was of sound mind and body when he made these decisions. He clearly anticipated challenges to his will, and he had painstakingly ensured his final wishes would be honored. Tears streamed down my face, blurring Julian's elegant script. The enormity of his final act of love was almost unbearable. Mr. Thorne, with a quiet patience that belied his sharp legal mind, explained further. Julian, he revealed, had no close living family, only a few distant cousins whom he had consistently supported. His vast wealth wasn't from some shadowy dealings, but from decades of shrewd real estate investments and ethical business ventures that had blossomed into a formidable empire. After taxes, Ms. Vance, Mr. Thorne stated, his voice calm and precise, you will receive approximately $180 million. $180 million. The number was so astronomically large, so utterly disconnected from my reality of Uber rides and mildewed studio apartments, that it felt completely unreal, incomprehensible. I was a widow living on Social Security, and now I was a multimillionaire. It was a dizzying, terrifying, exhilarating thought. Mr. Thorne then shared another crucial piece of information. Mr. Sterling, he continued, had also engaged a private investigator for some time who kept him informed about your situation. He paused, meeting my gaze directly. He was fully aware of your house situation, Ms. Vance. He knew about your son and daughter-in-law's actions and their betrayal. A gasp escaped me. Julian knew. He knew everything. My shame, my humiliation, my destitution. He had known and he had chosen to act. Mr. Sterling specifically stated, Mr. Thorne recited, reading from a legal document, that this inheritance should allow Ms. Vance to show certain people exactly what they gave up when they chose greed over love. The words delivered in Julian's absent voice sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just a gift. It was a tool, a weapon. He handed me one more sealed envelope, smaller than the first. This is a final personal note from Mr. Sterling to you, Ms. Vance. He wished for you to have it as you consider your next steps. I opened it, my eyes scanning Julian's familiar handwriting. My dearest Eleanor, it read, the world is now at your feet. Use this power wisely. Buy any home you desire, no matter the cost. Help your family, if they truly deserve it, if they genuinely show remorse and change their ways. Or if they continue their destructive path, ensure they never have the power to hurt you or anyone else again. Your future is yours to command. You are free. I left the opulent law office in a daze, my head spinning with the weight of Julian's immense legacy. He hadn't just given me money, he had given me something far more valuable. Immense power, control over my own story, and a chance for true justice. I walked out into the crisp autumn air, a different woman than the one who had entered. The shame that had clung to me for months began to lift, replaced by a steely resolve. I spent 3 days in my tiny studio apartment, processing it all. The initial shock gave way to a cold, calm clarity. The grief for Julian was still profound, but interwoven with it was a newfound strength. The time for sorrow was over. It was time for action. On the fourth day, I picked up my phone. It felt strangely heavy in my hand. I hadn't spoken to Thomas in months, not since he'd dismissed my plight as my lifestyle. I dialed his number. He answered, his voice brusque, clearly surprised to hear from me. "Thomas?" I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. "I need to see you, both of you. There's something important I need to discuss." He started to make excuses, mumbling about his busy schedule, about Bethany being out of town. "No excuses, Thomas," I asserted, my voice firm. "Tomorrow afternoon, your house. Be there." And I hung up before he could argue further. The next afternoon, a cold gray day, I pulled into the driveway of my old house. It was almost unrecognizable. The familiar rose bushes Arthur had planted were gone, replaced by stark, modern landscaping. The once warm, inviting red front door was now painted a severe black. It felt alien, a stranger's house wearing the skin of my home. Thomas opened the door, his face looking older, etched with a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. His eyes, though they tried to avoid mine, held a flicker of apprehension. Behind him, almost as if on cue, appeared Bethany. She was perfectly styled, as always, her blonde hair immaculate, her expensive clothes pristine. Her calculating expression was, as usual, her only tell. I didn't wait for an invitation. I simply walked past Thomas into the house that had once been mine. The interior was sterile, modernized, stripped of every trace of my 37 years of memories. The warm, inviting colors were replaced by cold grays and whites, the cozy furniture by sleek, uncomfortable pieces. It felt less like a home and more like a showroom. I stood in the middle of the living room, taking it all in. I turned to face them, my gaze steady, unflinching. Thomas was shifting his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Bethany, however, stood with an air of practiced superiority, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk on her lips. "On Monday," I announced, my voice calm, clear, and ringing with a quiet authority that stunned them into silence. "I inherited $260 million. Thomas's jaw dropped, his face paling, the color draining from it. Bethany's perfectly composed features faltered, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly, a flicker of raw, unadulterated greed flashing within them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, stunned into a silence more profound than any I had ever witnessed from them. Bethany, ever the quicker to regain her composure, recovered first, a sickly sweet smile replacing her shock. "Oh, Ellie," she gushed, stepping forward, her hand reaching out as if to touch my arm. That's wonderful news. A true windfall. You must be overwhelmed. We'd be more than happy to help you manage it, of course. With Thomas's business acumen and my eye for investments." I cut her off, my voice sharp, cutting through her syrupy words like a knife. "I'm quite capable of managing my own affairs, Bethany, and I'm well aware of your eye for investments, considering how you invested my home right out from under me." My gaze was ice cold, piercing through her false cordiality. I then turned to Thomas, who looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Thomas," I said, my voice now laced with disappointment and a deep sadness, "do you have anything to say?" He mumbled something, incoherent words about misunderstandings, about looking out for the family, about difficult decisions, but no apology, no genuine remorse. My voice rose then, no longer calm, but filled with a righteous anger that had been simmering for months. "You let your wife steal my home, Thomas," I said, my voice trembling with the force of my emotions. "The home your father and I built, the home you grew up in. You abandoned me, Marcus, your own mother, when I needed you most. And you called it supporting my lifestyle." Bethany, her perfectly composed mask finally slipping, erupted. "You signed those papers willingly, Ellie," she shrieked, her voice high and shrill, betraying the calculated calm she usually maintained. "Things change. We needed that asset for Thomas's business. You had no right to assume anything." "You promised it was temporary," I retorted, my voice cutting through her desperate defense. The memory of her fake tears, her trembling hands, her desperate pleas in my old kitchen, rose up, fueling my resolve. "You sat in my kitchen, Bethany, crying those fake crocodile tears, telling me it was just collateral, just paperwork. You manipulated me. You defrauded me. And Thomas stood by and watched. I looked around the sterile, old interior of what used to be my home. The anger, though righteous, began to fade, replaced by a profound sense of detachment. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a monument to their greed, a hollow shell stripped of warmth and love. And as for this house, I continued, my voice calm once more, don't worry, I won't be buying it back. It's no longer my home. It's just a bald and empty house, filled with cold and empty memories. Their eyes widened further, a flicker of bewildered disappointment mingling with the shock. They had clearly expected me to reclaim it, to make some grand gesture of ownership. However, I added, watching their faces, despite your disgraceful actions, I still care for my grandchildren. They deserve a chance at a real future, untainted by your avarice. I paused, letting my words sink in. I have set up irrevocable education trusts for each of them. These trusts will be managed by independent trustees, ensuring that their future opportunities are secure and that you, Bethany, and Thomas will have absolutely no involvement or access to those funds. Bethany vibrated with barely contained rage, her face flushing crimson. How dare you, Ellie? Lording it over us with your sudden windfall. We don't want your money. We never wanted your money. The protest rang hollow, a transparent lie. No, I agreed, a faint, humorless smile touching my lips. You don't need it, but you want it. I can see it in your eyes, Bethany, and I can hear it in your voice. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. But I've learned my lesson. Julian taught me that love can be a powerful force, but so can protecting yourself from those who would exploit it. I have already engaged a private investigator to look into the specifics of how my house was taken. If any evidence of fraud or coercion is found, I will pursue it to the fullest extent of the law. You can be certain of that. Thomas, finally breaking his stunned silence, stumbled forward, his face etched with desperation. Mom, please, he stammered, his voice cracking. Let's not do this. Let's work this out. We can be a family again. The words were an obvious plea for the inheritance, not for reconciliation. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the lost little boy he once was. But that image was quickly overshadowed by the man who had chosen greed and betrayal. Thomas, I said, my voice heavy with sorrow, are you truly sorry you hurt me? Are you sorry you abandoned me and let your wife steal everything I had? Or are you just sorry you missed out on $260 million? His silence was deafening, a damning confirmation of my suspicions. He couldn't meet my gaze. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken truths. Goodbye, Thomas, I said, my voice firm, final. Take care of your children. Love them better than you loved me. With that, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving them standing there, frozen in their shock and regret. As I stepped back into my car, a profound sense of lightness washed over me. I was free, empowered. Bethany would undoubtedly be planning her next manipulation, her next scheme, but it was too late. I was beyond her reach. 6 months later, I stood on the welcoming porch of my new farmhouse, nestled deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It wasn't just a house, it was a home built with intention, filled with light, and open to the chosen family who had stood by me. By the gently flowing pond, I had placed a simple stone bench etched with an inscription, for Julian, who taught me that love never really ends. I had immersed myself in Julian's journals, entrusted to me by Mr. Thorne. They were a testament to his unwavering love, detailing how he had ethically built his empire and how, for decades, he had anonymously tracked my well-being, always from a respectful distance. His final journal entry, written just before he picked me up as his Uber driver that first time, spoke of his profound regret, his hope to simply see me once more, and to somehow finally tell me he loved me. My journey had transformed from one of quiet despair into one of profound peace. I reconnected with old friends, ones who truly loved me, and cultivated new relationships. I established scholarships for young people, specifically those who had faced betrayal or hardship from their own families, offering them the chances I once yearned for. At 63, I found it was never too late to start over, to choose dignity, self-respect, and to recognize that love takes many forms, some lasting a lifetime, some rekindled in the twilight of life, and some, like Julian's, a guiding star even after it fades from view. I now only answered calls from people I wanted to talk to, a revolutionary act of self-care. I was no longer a victim but the author of my own destiny, traveling toward a future I had chosen for myself, funded by a love that had waited 45 years to set me free. I couldn't wait to see where I was going next.